One of my most favorite pages on or accounts on Twitter is History Czar and Africa Hub. Sometimes, they disappoint me in how they put things, but it's two of my most favorite accounts. And the reason I really enjoy those accounts is because every time I look at all the photographs, which really ought to be in color because it makes it look like it was 100-year-old thing or whatever. But I'll look at a year like 1986. I was already 4 years old then. That's when the Dompas was finally done away with. This is 30 years after the 1956 Women's March. I see all of these dates, and it had me thinking of the day South Africa found out that Chris Hani had been killed. I remember I was living in Koankoa. It's a township just outside of Zanin in Limpopo. I remember my parents in the lounge. I remember my mother just crying, like she was crying like she'd lost a sibling or a parent. And I remember we're living in those 4 rooms, those apartheid 4 rooms. Everything is so vivid. Everything is so vivid about that moment. But the 2 things I remember the most is my mother crying and my father. And for some strange reason, there were a number of people at our house. And the television was on. This news kept going. And I remember walking in there because it really alarmed me. As you all know, seeing your father cry is a different kind of thing. So you're just like, what? I walked in there and I asked them Tsonga. So I said, Iman Chris, Iman Chrisan. What has happened? Who's Chris Hani? Oh, no. I said, Kumelain, what happened? And then, I don't know if it was my father or just someone, and they said, Badlaye Chris Hani. I'm like, Iman Chris Hani. Because the person said they've killed Chris Hani. So I'm like, who's Iman Chris Hani? Who's Chris Hani? And then they pointed to the television screen and I saw him. And I remember how often in the mornings, in the little passage of our 4 room, if you can even call it a passage, just an area where it splits off into the bedrooms, lounge, and bathroom. But I remember how every morning my father would do this toy things. Like, our favorite thing was my dad would put up his arms like this on both sides, and as part of it, like, would be toying and he's exercising at the same time, and he would say to us, and no, not say to us, and we would say to him, Papa, he Jimmy saying, gym us or whatever. And my older sister and I would hold on to each arm and just swing, and my father would lift us up and down like that. And so, like, the name Chris Hani was, I remember his name so much. It's so linked to that little passage because we used to do little chants and little marches in there. But his death was equal to losing a family member for Black people. And Chris Hani was one of many. And when I think of that time, my parents were and continue to be ANC members. But what I remember back then about the liberation movement is that everyone fought together. Chris Hani belonged to the SACP, but the death was felt by everyone. It did not matter whether you were SAPC or you were ANC and Chris Hani He's one of hundreds and thousands of black leaders, black people. Now, if you look at, I don't even want to go into what destiny was interrupted. And so when you hear the stories about, oh, you must get over it and you must this and you must that, when some of us can vividly remember the moment that Chris Hani was taken from us. I remember in later years when I would bump into his wife, not because I knew her personally, no, I did not. But sometimes you at a shop and she's there. That's what I mean. And I'd see her. And I would always look at her and think of that moment in my house. And I think, what was the moment like in her house? If that was what it was for people, I don't know if my parents had personally met Chris Hani, but for people who'd never met him, if his death was that. So when you see her years later, even now, when she would go to court to stop that murderous news from being released, I believe in forgiveness, getting past things and stuff. But I know what that death did to people. And so I can only imagine what that death did to her and her children. We must never forget. We must never, ever forget. And we must not let other black people who want to act brand new and speak of us as though we are unworthy, that we cannot lead ourselves, that we cannot govern ourselves. We need to stand up even louder and stronger in the face of all those people, because the media is dangerous, DA is dangerous, whatever, but the most dangerous person right now is the black person who boldly takes money from these people to kill their own people. Because now that tweet, that paid for tweet where you promote some nonsense, that is you just loading up a gun. And the gun looks different now. But my God, it kills all the same.